All right, so we are recording, and thank you everyone for joining us. And those watching at home, I guess everyone's watching at home, but those watching after the fact, thank you for joining us. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker for our caregiver education series today. We're going to be talking about social isolation and loneliness, and we have Rich Gwaltney here from Transitions Life Care. He is the community engagement representative. He has over 28 years of experience serving in nonprofit organizations in both education and spiritual care. He received his graduate degree in educational leadership from Wright State University in Dayton, Ohio in 2000. And before working at Transitions Life Care, Rich and his family were on a 5-year adventure in Malaysia, where he served as a spiritual life director at an international school. He has a lifelong passion to engage people of all ages concerning the issues that matter most in life. So we are very lucky to have him here with us today, and I will turn it over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Kendall. Thank you guys for being here today, and those of you that'll be listening later. I do appreciate the opportunity. This is not my first time at this rodeo. We've been here a couple of times through COVID, as well as before, and just honored to be in the room with you. I've always said in about the last 8.5 years of working in our organization, Transitions Life Care, which you would know us more as Hospice of Wake County. We'll tell you just a little bit about that on the front end here. But in the last 8.5 years of doing community engagement and education, you know, it's a caregiver audience, to me, in my experience, has been the most touching, the most just open to exploring and just also in need of care, self-care, just to have people speak into and come alongside folks in their caregiving journey. Anytime I'm with a caregiving audience, I just appreciate the journey you're on, and that we've kind of positioned ourselves closely to a lot of caregivers in our community over the years. Through a lot of events we have helped to create, caregiver summits and resources and caregiver support in all manners. So we're aware that just even way upstream from when someone would ever need us as a hospice organization, that's why we started to work intentionally with the caregiving community. So first and foremost, I want to thank you for being here. I hope this is a bit of an oasis in the middle of your day, or whenever you're viewing this, and can carve out some time to find some rest in the midst of this journey. So let me start by saying this. Before I share my screen, we had mentioned earlier as we were starting that everything you'll see on the slides today, I'm going to send to Kindle in the form of a PDF, which is a much smaller file than a PowerPoint. And you'll be able to access any of the stats, quotes, figures, or thoughts that kind of are directing us. This is not intended to be a highly academic endeavor that we're getting into. I tell people, we really want to reach people's hearts. And it's from the heart, the center, and the seat of where we think and live and love and laugh and hurt and all the things we go through in life. That's really what we want to speak to today. And I'll tell you on the front end as well, is everything we talk about today concerning social isolation and loneliness. It's really I'm going to share some information that at this point may feel redundant because you've probably done a lot of the things we've talked about, but it's good for us to be reminded of the need to advocate for ourselves, especially as caregivers, but even going through this together collectively. We're going to talk about some of those skills and ways to make sure not only are we not isolating ourselves or dealing with those feelings of loneliness, but that we're also actively pursuing and looking for others who may be in that place. So I will also add this, since we are recording, I like to do what I call kind of setting the table. I'm going to set a table with a lot of information and some encouragement as we go today. And at the end, when Kendall stops the recording, we'll go into kind of our Q&A time that just in case you don't want to be recorded, which is fine. And then we can just start to dialogue. You may have something to share. You may have something to add or something to ask. And if not, you will have our contact information, mine, Kendall will know where to get me. Sometimes talks like this are some memories or some ideas that may not come up till later. So just know I'm going to set the table like a good chef here today, and you can pick from the buffet of things. Hopefully you'll find something that suits you. Okay. So let me take a quick minute and here we go. And Kendall, if you'd be so kind as just give me a thumbs up and make sure that you can see the screen as we checked earlier. Are we good?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, great. Well, let me just start. The best part about setting the table here is we'll start with a little appetizer. Let me just tell you a little bit about who we are and what we do. As I mentioned, we're Transitions Life Care. You would know us as Hospice of Wake County. Every organization has a story. Ours started back in once upon a time, back in 1979, when one of Raleigh's first oncologists found his patients reaching a place where a cure was no longer an option, and he wanted to do something about it. So in 1979, he started a nonprofit organization with 2 volunteer nurses, and they served over 6 or 7 patients that first year. And as we've grown, and this is 40 plus years, now 41 years later, as of last year, or 2 years ago, 2019, at the end of, and I had to put up our new stats, but these are pretty close to where we're at. As we grew, we went from those 2 employees serving 7 patients to over 650 employees, over 380 volunteers, and we've cared for over 7, on average each year, even since this time, over 7,500 patients. So what we decided to do, so you know, is we just changed what we call ourselves, because the name Hospice of Wake County didn't do justice to what we did and where we did it. So we serve about an 8-county area, Wake, Durham, Johnston, Harnett, Orange, of course, Chatham, which I'm currently sitting in. And as I told Kendall earlier, I'm in the World Broadcast headquarters here in Pittsburgh, where I kind of touch down each day in an office here. I live in Chapel Hill. Chapel Hill's been home for me for going on 10 years now. But you'll see, while where we serve has grown and expanded, even what we do has changed, meaning it's grown. And I tell people this: Wake County is still the center and core of where our hospice facility is, where our hospice home and our main offices, administrative and educational offices. And hospice is still the center and core service that we offer. We offer care long before someone would need hospice, ranging from caregiver support, home health, palliative care, even children's hospice and palliative care, home health, and then hospice, of course, and then grief and bereavement care, which we offer to anyone free of charge, to anyone who's lost a loved one who's passed. So you can tell now in just a brief light appetizer that, because this one could turn into a very fulfilling meal right away, 7 courses to tell the whole story. But it gives you an idea of who we are and how we enter into this caregiving conversation today. My background, as Kendall mentioned, has been in the nonprofit field for over 28 years, which was a very creative way of saying I've done a lot of things in a lot of places for not a lot of money. Most people who work in the fields that we work in, really, I just tell people I like to know I can look at my life and that I want to make a living while making a difference. And I know being a part and finding my place and telling our organization's story to people like you and encouraging you in this caregiving journey, that's the difference maker for us. We get an extra check that doesn't go in the bank, and it goes much deeper for us. So again, thank you. And now you can kind of see a little bit about why we changed our name from what it was to Transitions Life Care. Well, let's jump. Yeah.
I don't want to catch you up. I think that your slides might be frozen because we're still on the first slide with just your logo, and I know you've got some other stuff there.
Here, let's do this again. I apologize, everyone.
Okay.
There we go.
There we go. Yep. Thank you.
All right, hold on one second. So yeah, I was telling you a little bit about us, our story. Those were some of those figures and our who we are, where we serve. My apologies. And this kind of gets us to jumping and segueing right into our conversation today. As I mentioned earlier, if you have questions, thoughts, observations, feel free to just write them down, or if you want to today, type them into the chat box or the Q&A section, and we'll just come back to those at the end when it's time, if that sounds okay for you, all right? And just we'll revisit those one at a time and make sure if you do have questions today, we'll make sure you walk away with an answer or for a promise from us to find that answer. Well, that does bring us up with a big windup, and now here's the pitch is let's talk about social isolation and loneliness. Let me say this. We were beginning, even pre-COVID, to put together this conversation because the epidemic at the time of social isolation and loneliness was obviously disproportionately affecting people who are aging. And as we look at that, but why this became such a timely conversation is because after the pandemic hit, we all started to find ourselves being isolated and going through these intense feelings of loneliness because of the separation that we had from one another in our normal lives. So the timeliness of this, whether you're a caregiver, whether you would consider yourself as aging and you're feeling this before COVID, but there are some resources available, but some, like I said, some helpful reminders of things hopefully you've already done, or maybe some things you need to go back and revisit that could help you as well. So a good friend of mine who I was inspired through her presentation on this topic, you know, she Whitney Brooks, she had shared and really started this conversation by talking about a person's purpose. You know, our purpose in life, our meaning for existing, and how we find meaning is personal to us. It drives who we are. It connects us with others. It helps us to find community, and it plays a major role in our health and well-being. People have found too that having a purpose in life may actually increase, decrease our risk of dying early. So what matters, according to most researchers, is not what a person's life purpose is, but it's that they have one. And think about, even for us, all of us, anyone you see walking down the street, how COVID has affected that, regardless of your caregiving journey or your age or circumstances. Well, make sure I didn't accidentally mute myself there. Okay, we're good. But what happens when a person's purpose fades away? Oftentimes, because our purpose connects us to community and connecting to others, we start to lose that. And that's really kind of where we probably, if many of us at times have found ourselves, and maybe even for you today, you found yourself in that place. Well, I'm all, if you've done any conversations like this with me before, I'm big on definitions of just simple concepts and words. There's so many words we can use, and we think we know what we mean. And I think that's true when we talk about isolation and loneliness. So let me start by underscoring two things. What is isolation and what is loneliness? Isolation, someone who is socially isolated is someone who spends the majority of their time alone. They could also live in rural areas with no one nearby. And being isolated is usually a result of circumstances beyond someone's control. Sound familiar to anybody? There are a lot of circumstances beyond our control. So isolation is kind of a state of being. It's a circumstance. What is loneliness, though? Loneliness then is a feeling. So it's good to remember those two things. Isolation is a circumstance. Loneliness, that relates to how people feel. Feelings of sadness, distress, feeling disconnected are commonly linked to loneliness. And those who experience loneliness could be going through major life transitions, regardless of age. But then again, as we've already broadened this, to different circumstances. So to think, even to further clarify isolation doesn't have to come because you are physically separated from everyone and living out in a rural or on the edge of a cliff, like in this little picture here. It's because there's just no contact with other people, no connectivity. And how much more so we learn that. And then, of course, during COVID, and then the after effects of how that affects us emotionally with loneliness and distress. It looks like I'm pausing. I'm just moving some things around so I can see you still and see myself and the slide. So the impact of social isolation and loneliness. Some of these stats or figures you've probably seen or heard if you've kind of dipped your toe in this water of understanding it. It's referred to as a silent epidemic. Silent because not a lot of people self-report that they're isolated or they're feeling alone and they're feeling sad over that. That people just tend to just move on and just try to get by with it. 25% of people over 65 live independently and would be considered isolated, while 43% of people over 60 have reported feeling lonely. And I can only guess that has skyrocketed across not just age groups, but other circumstances. Isolation and loneliness has also been directly related to an increase of vulnerabilities in areas of risk to heart disease, stroke, dementia, other related conditions. Isolated and lonely seniors or caregivers or people report a greater incidence of depression and anxiety. They can suffer even a mortality rate comparable to that linked to people who smoke excessively, obesity, excessive alcohol consumption, and physical inactivity. So scientists and researchers have found that even if you were just the act of being or the state of being isolated from other people and those feelings of loneliness without putting in measures in place to remedy that, or at least to help cultivate more of that connection, can actually have direct links to adverse health conditions. When we said earlier, you heard me talk about how this was an epidemic, it actually had a very far-reaching, effects all across the world. So much so that even in the UK, they actually appointed a minister of loneliness to help, to spearhead the efforts to become more aware of and proactive in reaching those who are most vulnerable to being isolated and having those feelings of loneliness. Again, if you've paid attention by any stretch to legislation pre-COVID and even during it, a lot with assisted living facilities and nursing homes, there have been legislation locally, regionally, statewide, and even on a national level about addressing these issues of loneliness, especially in the aging community. People have gone as far as saying, well, the crazy creation of robots. Not that the use of technology shouldn't be used. We're going to talk about that in a second. But any type of entity or connection that would help people make a connection with and not feel alone. So I heard someone up to the tune of $1 million robot someone had created to try to manufacture to be a companion, which we know is no good substitute for just good old human contact or a voice. Now, I don't know if you've heard of the concept of frequent faces. Let me tell you just briefly as an illustration, especially in rural communities in our state, but we're hearing this from a lot of places, is that remember, isolation is a state of being, right? You are isolated from others. You may be feeling lonely. What was happening is that first responders were getting phone calls on 911 from seniors and elderly who were feeling lonely, and they were isolated from their families. And they'd call 911 and saying things like, I think I hear someone in my house, or I smell smoke. And as soon as the ambulance or the first responders would arrive, they would start checking blood pressure. They'd start talking to the person who called. And after a few minutes, they start talking about their family. They start asking first responders about their families. And what they started to categorize these calls is they were frequent faces, frequent callers, faces of callers who just wanted someone to come check in on them, someone to just come hold their hand, someone to come check their blood pressure. And it wasn't about their blood pressure, it was the attention and the connection. So that created some unique responses, and we're going to share what a few of those could look like. Now, I copied some of these, some without permission, but these images that you're hopefully seeing now, as we think back to COVID, depending on what state you've lived in, and obviously we're in North Carolina, I've seen these and lived in a few. They have some creative ways of communicating what 6 feet is, right? I spent a number of years in Florida, so the keep one alligator apart, that kind of resonated. The Californians, everything from 8 burritos to a surfboard to flip-flops to pints of beer, to and down in Texas to stay 3 armadillos away or 13 horned lizards. The reason I share this with you is when we think about social distancing, how does that affect us in this world and on this issue or this topic of isolation and loneliness? Well, I want to tell you on a personal level, when COVID was literally, it was about this time last year, we just hit the 1-year anniversary. Actually, a year ago yesterday, we were able to get my daughter married in a smaller service, in a smaller setting, in a smaller crowd 1 year ago yesterday. And it was around the 10th to the 20th when everything started shutting down. And after that wedding, everybody just we just went quiet, went dark. Everything just stopped moving. And I just remembered in my heart just reaching out to neighbors and then my colleagues at work and contacts in the community and then friends. And I remember my challenge to them, and on this concept today, is for us not to let social distancing turn into social isolation. There's a proverb that's always meant a lot to me. It says, it's better to have a neighbor who's nearby than a brother who's far away. Typically in most families we know, we can count on a brother and a family member, but it's times like COVID and times like just adverse circumstances, shared adverse circumstances, where neighbors, we have an opportunity for neighbors to become more like family. So I remember reaching out to my neighborhood, to my colleagues with these same sentiments to try to reconnect, to try to revisit and engage. And I would challenge you, well, first and foremost, I hope you're hearing this today from your own perspective, obviously, and the self-care piece and making sure you're making connections. But, if you were to draw a circle, not just a physical distance around your house, but, think about your life circle, your sphere of influence, circle of influence. Write out the names of your family members, near and far. Move to your neighbors. Who are your near dwellers? The people who are literally are there on your street, but maybe they're the passerbys and the strangers or the people that you meet when you're walking down the street. So think about the names and faces, whether it's someone who used to serve you coffee regularly or someone you just got used to seeing and you feel like you know them. And like I said, colleagues, coworkers, community partners, and just that simple outreach to let people know we're thinking about them. I think at this stage, a year later, this is where I said earlier, I'm just going to remind you of things I'm sure you're already doing, but I would encourage you, dust off that list if you haven't reached out to some people, because you know what? Some people, and I've seen this in my own personal life in church and other community groups, there are a lot of people, and maybe you're one of them, who've really yet to step back outside the house. Or we all know we're not back to normal, or even new normal, but there are a lot of people who are still physically, socially isolated from other people and low connection. And they are still feeling those intense feelings of loneliness and sadness and distress. So let's not think because maybe we've weathered most of the worst is that we should give up on checking on each other. So maybe in the middle of this, or let's say, hopefully we're nearing the end, if not past the midway point at least, discovering a renewed purpose. And I think that's happened globally, I think, but I know it's real easy to get so inwardly focused and also fearful that we don't want to get out, and that's understandable. But also, how are some creative ways that we can reach out and care for others? Well, in general terms, if you looked at this slide, I want you to think about this. General terms, how do we maintain social connections? Well, one, obviously, we've been using technology. Kendall and the whole group in Orange County have done an amazing job of making this happen. And I know you have as well, whether it's using Zoom, phone calls, FaceTime, Skype, making those connections for socialization, and like today for educational purposes. Pre-COVID, for age-related circumstances, people are coming up with great technology, and I think we have plenty of good technology now for everyone. But there were things like grandpads. They were like iPads for grandparents who maybe were not technologically savvy, that could very easily make connections with their families. So whatever the technology is, I always tell people this: technology is great, but try to be high tech and high touch at the same time. Just to see that smiling face, to hear that warm voice is so important. And it's one thing to deliver education and make this type of connection the other, but to look that significant person in your life in the eye, the one you're concerned about, just letting them hear your voice and hear it in your voice, that you love them, you concern, and you just want to reach out. Beyond that technology, there are groups all across our community that at senior and aging field, caregiving field as well, there are such things called warm lines. What's a warm line? Well, the step up from a warm line would be a hotline, right? Hotline is what you call when you're in crisis. But what's a warm line? These are friendship lines. And we're going to talk about some of these names I'm throwing out to you right now on resources such as One Hope, which is part of North Carolina Baptist Aging Ministry. I'm going to tell you a little bit about this idea and give you multiple options, not just through them, but other warm lines. These are places people can call in. This is national and regional, and with multiple organizations, not just the One Hope, but other friendship lines that offer emotional support and just friendship support. Lines where people can call in just to make a call and just say, hey, I'm lonely. I just wanted to talk to someone. So those are important. Call lists. You see this in a lot of departments on aging, senior centers, not just for shut-ins, because to be honest with you, again, we're all shut-ins, but especially for those who are most vulnerable. In your organization, your church, your nonprofit, your community, to have a regular call list that where you're checking on people, knocking on the door and backing up 6 feet and just saying, hey, I just want to make sure you're okay, or hey, let's put together an email list on our our road, or in our family, or a text list where we can just connect, but systematically making calls just to make sure that the people important to you, and in the Department of Aging and in a senior center and in a caregiving support group, to make sure we're checking in regularly with each other, which brings us to caring teams. And that's kind of ingrained in a lot of these. In situations, especially as a caregiver, identifying, enlisting, mobilizing not just your neighbors and friends and families, but also identifying those community partners, which of course we're sitting in one of those evidence-based right now just because of this invitation to be here today. But recognize where are those places where you can have resources. These are different ways for us to do this, which is actually now going to bring me to an additional resource page. Now, I will not read every word on this, but I do want to draw your attention, because remember, a lot of this is about reminding us, or hopefully opening our eyes to some things we didn't know were there. So here are examples that I've researched, we've researched, and reached out to contacts. I mentioned One Hope. this is an outreach, 100 counties all across North Carolina for 65 and up between the hours of 9 and 9, where a person, if they're feeling lonely, it's really about a spiritual response to social isolation and loneliness. This is not trying to push anything on anyone, but if you're a person of faith from a Christian standpoint, Carolina Baptist, North Carolina NC Baptist Aging Ministry, they have trained and equipped workers that basically the calls go directly to these individuals during this time, and they're just there to listen, offer prayer if you need it, or just care in any way. Mostly this is what's considered a warm line with a spiritual response. Along with that, the next resource there, Hope Line. Similar to this, Hope Line's mission is to support people and save lives even during crisis through caring, confidential conversations. So I don't know if you've heard of this before, but this is a 24-hour hotline. So we just went from warm to hot. And we're going to go back to warm here in a second. But the Hope Line, so this is maybe even in the midst of this. Maybe you just need a warm voice on the other line, a confidential conversation. Maybe you feel it's a crisis. Remember, not a lot of people self-report that they're feeling lonely, but that loneliness can reach a place of despair sometimes pretty quickly. So maybe you need someone to call. So you'll see listed here websites as well as phone numbers, but that is a 919 number local. So that's a 24-hour hotline. The Institute on Aging has a 24-hour, again, what's referred to as a friendship line. Now this one doubles warm and hotline. It's both crisis intervention hotline and a warm line for non-emergency emotional support calls. So just pausing here, again, these are all hypothetical. It could be you. It could be the person you're caring for. It could be a grandparent or a friend or a neighbor down the road, or you just knowing this resource is there. Maybe it is for you. And you're just like, look, I need a confidential friend on the other end of the line that I can just reach out to and just say, I'm really struggling with this. Now, what's great about this one is that it's both a hotline too. If someone calls in and that non-emergency actually it becomes an emergency, they'll know how to refer you to some resources that can help you immediately address that crisis. A good segue here is not everyone's a member of AARP, and I'm not here to promote them, but at the same time, I'm very closely connected with AARP and think they have some great resources and great people nationally, locally, but especially right here, friends of mine that work there. They've really led the way in areas of caregiving support, but also about this community connections. So there are a lot of great social isolation and loneliness type resources in this link. Just go to their website. While you may need to be a member to access some of them, it's worth your time just to peruse this and take a deeper dive to understand what's out there and ways that you can connect yourself. Now, I listed here the next resource, NAMI, National Alliance on Mental Illness. And I hesitated at first to include this, but then I started to really put some thought to this. And, you know, at what point of time do you differentiate between what is a situational circumstance, whether it's COVID or someone's aging or they've moved or they're out in the country or someone passes and then they're just left alone? But what is it, when is that tipping point or trigger point where we have to discern, well, maybe this distress, maybe this depression that's not going away, maybe it's something more. Maybe it's chemical. Maybe it's something that I've dealt with my whole life. And NAMI is just a wealth of information, education, and referrals on topics of mental illness. You know, the stigma around mental illness has been lifted in so many circles as people have become more transparent about their struggles emotionally, that there's not a stigma there, and there shouldn't be, especially when we need help. So again, NAMI is not a place necessarily for us to go self-diagnose. It's just a place for us to go and realize there might be some resources here that could help me, because maybe maybe post-COVID, pre-COVID, doesn't matter. Maybe that person that you're thinking about, or yourself, maybe I need professional help. Maybe I need a counselor, someone who's more equipped with the terrain of my heart and my mind and my emotions to help me through this, and maybe even medically. So wrapping your head around those unique circumstances and resources is important. Well, lastly, I put a lot of these, and some of these I've already shared with you. Additional resources. I start with faith communities, not just because we're in the South and we're loaded with all faith communities. And I say that not just being in the Bible Belt of North Carolina and in the South, but, I've worked with both overseas and here, people of any, all, and no faiths. And it's in our faith communities where maybe if we're not a person of faith, that in times like this, when things get shaken and things get difficult, we start to reach out and look for something that maybe we haven't tapped into before. So if you know someone, or you yourselves are, reach out to your local faith communities that you're comfortable reaching out to, because most of them are very well equipped to reach out to and to care for you. And I just add that here as an encouragement. Departments on aging, which are departments on aging, which are very closely connected, as you well know, with the local senior centers, well equipped. And I put that in general, not just knowing I'm here today with you, but every county in every area typically has one. And I will say this, not because I'm here and I'm not schmoozing or kissing up or anything, but you guys are in an amazing one. There are some who do this because it's right and they just want, and there's a need there. There's some who just go that second and third mile. And I've seen just the robust nature of the programming and the quality of character and the people running this group, as well as all of the Department on Aging. This county has been very intentional to not only address it with a patch or something like that to just say we're doing it. They've really brought in expert opinions and just deep, loving hearts and caring people to create programs and things like this today to help care for you. I want to add too, Meals on Wheels, and not just Meals on Wheels Wake County, because they're all over, but there have been reports too, just that in some people's lives, when they're feeling isolated and lonely as a senior or someone who's aging, sometimes the only personal contact that some people self-report as having is with the person who's delivering their meals. So whether that's through Meals on Wheels or a congregate meal service or something through the senior center or a church, those connections are so important to make. But sometimes even just knowing that that's available. And along with that, of course, there's other resources below that. But I just want to say, and I'm going to segue and stop share, and I'll bring us to a complete. I'm going to bring the ride to a complete stop. Just on this statement, is to say on the recording portion of this, is that there, like I said to begin with, I'm reminding you probably of things you've done or tried. Hopefully, I'm turning your heart back to retry some of those, to open your eyes to the people around you in your circle of influence, to keep keeping those short lists and caring for that neighbor down the road, or regardless of their circumstances. But most of all, as a caregiver, to make sure that you're taking care of yourself. You can't give away what you don't have. I do a talk on finding Sabbath rest and strategies for finding that in a caregiver journey. And I want to challenge you that you have to rest from your work as a caregiver, because you're going to work from the place of that rest. And part of that rest is not just the absence of other people or responsibilities. It's that almost recreational connection with other human beings that mean the most to you, and focusing on those relationships and connections for you, so you can come back and be the only person that your care receiver has. And you need to be fully cared for, spirit, soul, body, mind, and everything, but especially in these relationships. So whether you are isolated or you're feeling lonely and in distress, it's not a shame. I told someone the other day, a man I met on the street, I've built a deep relationship with over the last 6 months. and just been trying to help him out as he's getting back on his feet. And I just told him, hey, it's not a sin. There's nothing wrong with being hungry. And the thing to do is don't sit there and be hungry without asking someone. And I say the same sentiment to you is it's not a sin or a shame to be isolated or to feel lonely or despair or in distress, but it's a travesty if you don't sometimes shoot up a flare and raise that flag so we know where to come and help you. And that's really what today is truly about. So with that, we're going to kind of pause this and then we'll segue into some Q&A, okay?
Thank you so much, Rich. That was very, very informative, very helpful. And I'm sure we've got some questions that you all want to cover. So I will go ahead and stop the recording. For those of you watching later, you can find the information for our aging helpline in the description right below the video, and feel free to reach out with any questions.